You probably think the worst job you can take at night is working security at some rundown mall or watching over an abandoned hospital. But I'm here to tell you that nothing, absolutely nothing, compares to what it's like being the night cleaner at the Hollow Rock Planetarium, tucked deep in the quiet woods of Colorado, where the stars don't just look back, they speak. They whisper things, they scream when you turn your back. And if you're not careful, one of them might even follow you home. What I've experienced inside that dome of fake constellations and dusty exhibits would make your blood turn to ice, your spine twist itself into knots, and your thoughts slip into places you never wanted to explore. But if you really want to understand why I clean with one eye, always watching the corners, why I never step past the third row of the main theater when the humming begins, or why I once locked myself in the janitor's closet for an entire hour while something snuffled outside the door, breathing like it was remembering me from somewhere far older than time, then you have to hear this story all the way until the very end. Because what happened in the final hour of my fifth shift changed everything. It wasn't just terrifying, it was reality shattering. I learned something no one was ever meant to know. And if you want that answer, you need to stay. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, is what it seems in this place. My first night started with a warning. The kind of warning you laugh at until it's 2 a.m. and you hear footsteps in a locked observatory room you just cleaned. The kind of warning that comes in the form of a laminated sheet of paper slid across a desk by a man whose name tag just says director, and whose face looks like it's forgotten how to smile. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask why I took a job that paid less than minimum wage for triple the work. He just stared at me with eyes that didn't blink enough and said, "Read the rules. Memorize them. Follow them. If you don't, we won't fire you. We'll bury you." I laughed, but he didn't. And then he walked out of the break room and locked the door behind him. That's when I unfolded the sheet and saw, printed in bold red ink that smelled faintly of burned hair, the 7 strange and terrifying rules to survive the night cleaning shift at Hollow Rock Planetarium, and I swear to you, even reading them felt like a sin. Rule 1. Never begin cleaning in the East Wing. Start anywhere else you like, but never, under any circumstance, enter the East Wing first. Something wakes up there if it hears footsteps before it hears the machines. Rule 2. If you see a man in a charcoal gray suit with no face standing near the space exhibit, do not acknowledge him. Do not speak to him. Do not turn your back to him. Keep walking. He leaves once he knows you're afraid. Rule 3. At some point during your shift, the intercom will turn on and play a child's voice reciting star names. If the voice reaches Betelgeuse, you must sprint to the supply closet and hide until the voice stops. If you're too slow, the dome will open. You must not be here when it opens. Rule 4. There's a hallway behind the theater that loops when it shouldn't. If you walk down it and return to the same place more than twice, close your eyes and walk backwards. Do not look at the walls. They're not made of drywall when the loop begins. Rule 5. The telescope in Observatory Room 3 will shift by itself. Do not look through it if you didn't move it. If it points directly upward, leave the room. There's something on the other side that can see you too. Rule 6. Around halfway through your shift, you may hear footsteps above you. This is not the roof. This is not an animal. Do not look up. Do not speak. Continue cleaning. It passes faster when it's ignored. Rule 7. If you find a child sitting cross-legged in the planetarium dome, weeping and tracing constellations on the floor with her finger, you must leave her alone. Do not ask where her parents are. Do not offer help. Do not touch her. If she stops crying, start running. She is not a child. She is not from here. I stared at the paper for what felt like hours, and the more I read the rules, the more it felt like they were staring back, like the ink was alive and breathing, curling around the edges with something far older than fear. The air in the break room seemed heavier, like the rules themselves had summoned something, and when I finally looked up, the fluorescent lights above me flickered. Just once, but long enough that I could swear I saw the faint outline of someone in the reflection on the floor. A child-sized shape, hunched and shaking. I told myself it was just nerves, just paranoia, just the power of suggestion. But even as I grabbed my mop and bucket and stepped into the vast, echoing silence of the planetarium halls, I could feel the weight of those rules pressing into me like invisible chains. Like every tile I stepped on was part of a game I didn't understand yet. One where breaking the rules didn't mean losing, it meant disappearing. The main dome was first, even though I hesitated. It was massive and cold, and the ceiling above me mimicked the night sky perfectly, almost too perfectly. The stars twinkled and shimmered as if they were alive, like someone had plucked real pieces of the sky and pinned them there to watch me. I pushed the mop across the smooth floor, listening to the strange echo of water sloshing in a building that shouldn't echo that way. It felt like the sound bounced off something invisible, like it was hitting walls that weren't physical, but listening. I didn't dare go near the east wing, not yet. I cleaned the lobby, the bathrooms, and part of the staff corridor, careful not to let my mind wander, because every time I let it drift, I felt the air shift around me, like the atmosphere itself was correcting for something, adjusting itself to fit a presence that had no name. It wasn't long before I heard it, soft static followed by a child's voice coming through the intercom, one syllable at a time. Andromeda, Sirius, Rigel, Antares. I froze. The mop fell from my hand and clattered against the floor. The voice was calm, too calm, and it was moving through the halls, like it wasn't just being broadcast. It was coming closer. Arcturus, Vega. My legs moved before my brain did. I sprinted past the break room, nearly slipped on the wet tiles, grabbed the supply closet door, and flung myself inside, just as the voice whispered, Betelgeuse. The air changed. Everything went dead silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears like you're underwater. I don't know how long I crouched there, heart hammering so loud I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. But when the static finally cut out and the hum of the planetarium returned, I didn't come out for another 5 minutes. When I finally did, the floor outside the closet was dry, though I hadn't mopped it yet, and there were footprints leading away, bare, small, child-sized. That's when I realized something horrifying. The rules weren't just bizarre traditions passed around to scare new employees. They weren't metaphors or pranks. They were survival instructions, written by people who knew that something wrong, something ancient and awful, slept in the foundation of this place. Something that didn't want to be observed, but demanded to be obeyed. And if I was going to make it through the next shift, I would have to follow every rule like it was carved into my bones. So that's exactly what I did. When I stepped into that planetarium the next night, still wearing the scent of fear from the night before, like it was soaked into my skin, I kept those rules in my head like a prayer, like a spell, each one echoing with more weight than I ever gave it before. And I made damn sure not to even glance toward the east wing as I clocked in, because Rule 1 was suddenly no longer a quirky suggestion on a crumpled laminated sheet. It was a warning from the grave, and I wasn't about to test it. That shift began just like the last, the stale air humming through the vents, the soft glow of the red exit signs casting thin blood-like light along the corridor floors, and my cart wheels squeaked slightly as I pushed them down the hallway that led to the maintenance closet. Only this time, I didn't hum to myself like usual, didn't plug in my headphones, didn't do anything that might dull the edge of my awareness, because I needed to hear everything, every click, every shuffle, every breath that might not belong to me. And I swear to you, the shadows already looked thicker than they had the night before, like the dark itself was bracing for what was coming. As I filled my mop bucket and started cleaning, not in the east wing, obviously, I couldn't stop glancing behind me every few seconds, because no matter how still the planetarium seemed, no matter how silent it stayed, there was this crawling sensation along the base of my neck, like something was watching me from somewhere just outside my field of vision, something old and uninterested in being known by anything as fragile as a human name. I was halfway done with the lobby floor when the intercom clicked to life with a low pop, just like it had the night before, but this time I didn't freeze or question it, didn't wait to see if it would pass. My breath caught in my chest the moment I heard that voice again. High-pitched, innocent, soft like a lullaby whispered in a graveyard. Vega, Sirius, Polaris, Altair. My blood turned to ice water. I bolted for the supply closet without even looking to see how close I was. I didn't think. I didn't count stars. I didn't wait for Betelgeuse. I just ran, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest, and dove into the closet, yanking the door shut and twisting the handle so hard I thought it would snap clean off. I crouched in the dark again, pressing myself into the wall, the voice on the intercom still droning through the air like a twisted nursery rhyme as I stared wide-eyed into nothing, every second drawing out longer than it had any right to, and I could feel something shifting in the atmosphere outside, like the dome itself was twitching, like it knew I was hiding from it, and it was disappointed. And then it came. Betelgeuse. The instant that cursed name passed through the speakers, a low mechanical grinding filled the building, deep and ancient, like metal gears that hadn't turned in 1,000 years had suddenly remembered how to move. And even from inside the closet, I could feel the dome above the planetarium begin to slide open, feel the strange pressure that came with it, like the air itself was being siphoned into the sky, like something was reaching down, not to grab, but to watch. Because that thing on the other side didn't need hands, didn't need claws, it had eyes. I don't know how long it stayed open, and I don't want to know. Time felt broken. The child's voice had stopped, and now the only sound was the deep droning pulse that came from above, not loud but constant, like a heartbeat you could hear inside your teeth. And all I could do was squeeze my eyes shut and mouth the rules to myself over and over again, like some pathetic spell to keep myself grounded. Until finally, the grinding reversed, the pressure lifted, and the air felt breathable again. I didn't come out for a long time after that. When I finally did, the planetarium was dead still again. My mop bucket was tipped over where I'd abandoned it, water soaking into the tile, but nothing else seemed touched. No signs of movement, no whispers from the dark, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel alone. I felt observed. I returned to my cart and resumed my route as if nothing had happened, and I was halfway through sweeping the corridor near the space exhibit when something made me stop cold. My hand was mid-motion when I felt the temperature drop. Not like air conditioning, not even like walking into a freezer, but dead, like the warmth had been taken, removed, like something had drained the heat from the atoms around me. And then I saw him. Standing perfectly still, not 5 feet away, just in front of the rotating Mars display, was a man. Tall, thin, wearing a charcoal gray suit so crisp it looked like it had never seen sunlight. But his face wasn't there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin stretched tight over a blank head, like a mannequin left in the oven too long, like someone had forgotten what a human was supposed to look like and made this thing instead. My body locked up. My breath caught halfway in my throat and refused to move. I remembered Rule 2. Do not acknowledge him. Do not speak to him. Do not turn your back to him. Keep walking. So I did the only thing I could. I gripped the handle of my broom until my knuckles screamed, and I walked. I didn't look at him again. I didn't breathe too loud. I didn't even blink too fast. I walked with every ounce of strength I had in my legs, each step like trying to push through cement, and I could feel his faceless gaze trailing behind me, like a knife made of frost brushing the back of my neck. I didn't stop until I reached the maintenance stairwell and ducked inside, slamming the door shut behind me and leaning against it with the kind of relief that feels like drowning lungs gasping for their first breath. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear anything. But I knew he had vanished the moment he sensed what he wanted. My fear, as real as blood in the air. And maybe that should have been the worst of it, but it wasn't. I was gathering myself enough to go clean the observatory rooms when I passed the hallway behind the theater, the one I'd never noticed before until last night's terror forced me to memorize every rule by heart. It looked normal. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, polished floor, but I knew better now. Still, I needed to test it. I needed to know how real these rules were. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't make it through the week. So I walked down it once. Came back. Nothing. Walked it again. Came back. Still fine. Third time, I turned the corner and found myself right back where I started, only this time the air smelled faintly of copper, like pennies and blood, and the walls weren't smooth anymore. They looked off, bulging slightly, like something underneath them was breathing, like the drywall had become skin. That was enough. I clenched my eyes shut and turned around, walking backward one step at a time, heart pounding, the sensation of movement stretching forever. And though I couldn't see what was happening behind me, I felt it. I felt the walls lean in as I passed, and I heard a whisper. Not words, not really, but the sound of lips moving right next to my ear. Then my back hit a corner, and I opened my eyes to see the janitor's closet across from me again, the hallway behind me silent and still, as if nothing had ever changed. But it had, and so had I. I had my answers now. The rules weren't random, they weren't exaggerations, they were desperate attempts from the ones who came before me to keep death or worse at bay. And there were still 4 more rules I hadn't encountered yet. 4 more horrors waiting to make themselves known. But even then, even knowing that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me from above, something that had seen me during the dome's opening and wasn't finished with me yet. I didn't sleep that night. Even when I locked myself in my tiny apartment, the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have, the air too thick to breathe. But the truth was, there was no escape. It wasn't just the planetarium, it was the feeling itself, the gnawing certainty that something had started, and it wasn't going to stop until I'd followed the last rule. There were only 4 left, and I knew I couldn't survive if I didn't obey each and every one. The next shift came faster than I expected. The usual hum of the building greeted me as I walked in, a low murmur in the back of my mind that never seemed to leave, always waiting, always lurking. I had no intention of walking straight into the East Wing like I had the first day, but somehow my feet took me there. Maybe it was because I knew the first rule was just a warning, a suggestion more than a command. But now I wasn't so sure. I didn't question it as I walked past the machines, but I could feel the pressure building, something stirring in the depths, aware of me, waiting. The air grew thick as the footsteps echoed off the polished floors, each step feeling heavier than the last. The intercom crackled and I froze. The voice, high-pitched and far too clear, echoed through the silence, its words like a beacon in the dark, unnatural in their precision. A child's voice reciting star names. I'd heard this before, but not like this. It sounded too real, too alive. Aldebaran, Rigel, Betelgeuse. I didn't wait for it to finish. I knew what came next. I'd read the rules. I knew the danger. But the voice, oh God, the voice was different this time, like it was coming from every direction, echoing through the walls, the floor beneath my feet. My heart started to race as I sprinted toward the supply closet, the sounds of my own breath drowning out the voice, even as it got louder. Betelgeuse, it called again, dragging out the name like a chant. I barely made it. My hands fumbled as I slammed the door behind me, locking it as the voice reached its final syllable. I had no idea how long I stayed there, my back pressed against the cool metal shelves, ears straining for any sign of what came next. It was too quiet now, too still. The air was thick with the weight of expectation, like everything was waiting, holding its breath. But when the intercom finally went silent, when the last notes of the child's voice faded into nothingness, I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I opened the door carefully, peering out into the darkened hallway. The planetarium was eerily still. No hum of machinery, no sound of footsteps, but then I heard it, the faintest shuffle of movement above me. Not above the roof, no, not where it should be. Something was walking, slow, deliberate, and the sound was coming from the upper levels. The floors groaned under the weight, a sound so unnatural that it felt like the building itself was shifting, pulling something from beneath. I froze. The rules had warned me. Don't look up. Don't acknowledge it. But I did. I raised my eyes to the ceiling, staring up into the dark abyss of the planetarium. There was nothing there. Nothing to explain the heavy presence I could feel pressing down on me. But I felt it. The gaze, unblinking, watching from the shadows. Something was in the upper levels, something that was never meant to be seen. I knew I shouldn't have looked, knew I should have obeyed the rules, but the need to understand, to make sense of what was happening, overwhelmed me. The floorboards creaked, and the sound of something moving close sent a shiver down my spine. My heart slammed against my ribs, my pulse loud in my ears. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Not until the footsteps faded, leaving only silence behind. I stood there, shaking, waiting for the next sign. I had already seen too much. The rules weren't just to survive, they were a map, guiding me through a maze of things far worse than I had ever imagined. I wasn't sure what it was that moved above me, but I was sure of one thing. It had seen me. When the footsteps stopped, I began to move again. The hallways were darker than before, and the weight of the air felt different, like it was pressing down on me, holding me in place. I forced myself to ignore the fear rising in my chest. I had to keep going. There were still rules to follow, still horrors waiting to show themselves. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led towards something worse. The intercom crackled again, the static filling the air, and then the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter echoed through the halls. It was soft at first, like a distant memory, but then it grew louder, more insistent, a hollow sound that made my stomach turn. The voice came again, almost sing-song, as though it was waiting for me to hear it. I knew the rule now, I knew what it meant. The child, the laughter, it was the prelude to something far worse. And then I saw her. A child sitting cross-legged in the middle of the planetarium dome, her back to me, her tiny hands tracing invisible constellations on the floor. The sight froze me to the spot. She was too still, too unnatural in her silence. Her tiny body was framed by the shimmering lights of the stars above her, but something about her didn't belong here. Her presence felt wrong, like a shadow cast where it should never have been. I remembered the rule immediately. I had read it, I had heard it, and I knew the consequences of ignoring it. Don't approach her, don't speak to her, don't even acknowledge her. But my feet didn't obey the command. My legs moved forward, one step at a time, before I could stop myself. "Hey," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could bite it back. The child's head snapped up and my blood ran cold. Her eyes, black as night, locked onto mine. Her face was twisted, not in anger, but in something darker, something that didn't belong in this world. The stars above flickered, as if they too feared her gaze. I opened my mouth to apologize, to say something, anything, but the words caught in my throat as I realized the true terror. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't sad. She wasn't anything human. Before I could take a step back, the dome above me began to creak, the air shifting as the lights above flickered and dimmed. And then I heard it, a low, deep growl, rumbling from the very foundations of the planetarium. The ground beneath me began to shake, and the stars, once fixed in place, started to swirl around the dome like they were alive, as if they were reaching for something or someone. And then I ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, the echo of my own footsteps pounding in my ears louder than any storm. But even then, I didn't dare stop, didn't dare turn around, because some primal buried part of me screamed that if I so much as hesitated, I would feel a cold hand on my neck, or worse, see those void black eyes peering out from the spinning heavens of the dome behind me, following, tracking, feeding on my fear and the rules I had broken just by looking at her for too long. And by the time I reached the staff hallway again and slammed the emergency door shut behind me, the silence that followed was worse than the sound, because it felt like something had paused, not stopped, and was waiting for the next opportunity to reach out again. I bent over, hands on my knees, sweat pouring off my face even in the frigid air, and I was about to pull out my phone to check the time when I heard it. So faint at first I thought it was just my racing heartbeat, but then it came again, clearer this time. A deliberate creak and scrape, slow and steady, directly above me, like someone, or something, was walking across the ceiling on all fours, dragging something heavy and wet with it, and that's when the memory of Rule 6 slammed into my head like a hammer to the skull. Around halfway through your shift, you may hear footsteps above you. This is not the roof. This is not an animal. Do not look up. Do not speak. Continue cleaning. It passes faster when it's ignored. I froze where I stood, body stiff as a statue, my mouth slightly open from panic and breathlessness, and all I wanted to do was look. Just a quick glance, just to confirm it wasn't real. But that voice in my head, the one that now sounded more and more like the panicked workers before me who wrote these rules in blood and desperation, screamed louder than anything else. Don't. Just don't. The scraping got louder, faster. like it knew I was listening, like it was testing me, taunting me. And then I heard something wet drip beside me, splashing onto the linoleum just inches from my foot. And I squeezed my eyes shut so hard I thought I might go blind, gripping my mop like it was a sword, and began blindly swiping it across the floor in wide, jerky arcs as if doing my job properly would somehow protect me from what was now circling overhead, like a vulture that had already chosen its corpse. I don't know how long it lasted, minutes, hours, years, because time stretched thin during those moments, like it didn't belong in that hallway with me anymore. Like whatever was above me was feeding on every passing second. And just when I thought I might collapse or scream or both, the sound stopped instantly, like someone cutting a cord, and the hallway fell back into its unnatural silence. I didn't speak. I didn't even breathe too loudly. I just stayed still, mop in hand, until my knees buckled and I had to crouch beside the janitor's cart and squeeze my eyes shut again, just to keep from sobbing. When I finally looked at my phone, I realized I was past halfway through my shift, which meant, assuming I didn't die or vanish or get pulled into the floor by whatever was above me, I only had a few more hours until morning. That thought should have brought relief. It didn't. Still trembling, I decided to head toward Observatory Room 3, which I hadn't cleaned yet. And I remember telling myself that if I kept moving, kept obeying the rules like a good little worker bee, maybe the place would let me survive the night. And maybe I'd have a chance to get answers from the guy who hired me. Answers that weren't just typed on a crumpled piece of paper or carved into my nightmares. As I neared Observatory Room 3, I saw the door was already slightly open, even though I knew I hadn't been in there yet, and no one else was supposed to be here. My heart immediately started pounding again because Rule 5, God, Rule 5, flashed in my head like a warning light in a storm. The telescope in Observatory Room 3 will shift by itself. Do not look through it if you didn't move it. If it points directly upward, leave the room. There's something on the other side that can see you too. I should have left. I know that now. I should have just turned around and gone back to the front lobby and waited the rest of the night out like a coward. But I didn't. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was stupidity, maybe it was the need to prove to myself that I wasn't just being toyed with. But whatever it was, I stepped inside. The room was cold, colder than the others, and silent in a way that felt wrong, like sound had been drained from the walls themselves. The telescope stood tall at the center. A monstrous black eye pointed skyward through the glass dome above, and the air around it shimmered slightly like heat waves. But it wasn't heat, because when I took another step closer, I felt my skin start to go numb. I looked at the floor first, avoiding the telescope entirely, and tried to clean around the base. My eyes locked on the tiles, but as I moved, the machine groaned. It was subtle at first, like the sound of old gears grinding to life after a long sleep, but then it grew louder, heavier, until the whole room was filled with the awful mechanical sound of something ancient turning toward me. I don't know what force made me glance up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the same thing that draws a moth to fire. But the second I looked up and saw the telescope had moved again, now pointing directly, perfectly, straight up, I felt something click in the back of my mind, like a lock opening somewhere it shouldn't. And without thinking, without giving myself time to reconsider, I stepped toward it. The eyepiece glistened slightly, like it had been crying, and before I could stop myself, I looked. The sky above was not a sky. It was alive. I saw stars arranged in patterns that made no sense, constellations that twisted and screamed as they moved, and something enormous in the black, a shape too big to see, too ancient to comprehend, with one glowing crimson eye that blinked once, just once, and the second it did, I felt it. It saw me. And worse, now that it had seen me, it would never unsee me. I stumbled back so hard I hit the wall and knocking over my cart, and I scrambled out of the room without bothering to pick up anything I'd dropped, my body cold and heavy like I'd been dipped in ice water, because I understood something then that I hadn't before. These weren't just rules to keep things out. They were instructions to keep me from being noticed by things already inside. And now one of them had noticed. Now I had broken Rule 5, and it knew my face. I didn't stop moving until I was back in the main exhibit hall where the models of planets hung silently above me and the motion sensor lights flickered on as if nothing was wrong, as if I hadn't just been marked by something that made stars scream. I looked up then, not at the ceiling, but at the upper mezzanine, the one that curved around the second floor, and I saw it, a shape, a shadow. Not moving, not hiding, just standing there, watching me. It was tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit, and it didn't have a face. It didn't move when I stared, and I didn't breathe as I did it, because I knew Rule 2 by heart, and I had just broken it in the worst way possible, acknowledging the faceless man standing motionless above me, just near the space exhibit, right where the plaques about exoplanets and the glass-encased meteorite were arranged. And though every inch of my instincts screamed at me to run, the moment I even thought about turning away, I felt it step forward, not with sound, not with weight, but like gravity had tilted and all of it was falling toward me through that blank void of a face. I couldn't scream. I don't think I even could have whispered, because my throat had gone dry and locked, and my fingers curled uselessly around the edge of the cleaning cart, which suddenly felt like a laughable defense against something that was never flesh and blood to begin with. Something that wore the suggestion of a suit and the mockery of human form just well enough to make my mind bend trying to fill in the blanks of where its eyes and mouth should have been. I took a shaky step backward, not turning, never turning, and its head tilted in perfect time with my movement, no delay, no hesitation, like it was tethered to my fear with a line I couldn't see, and each step I took yanked it tauter, thinner, and more real. And then suddenly, there was a noise. A harsh electrical buzz that cracked through the speaker system above me, and the intercom clicked on with the soft fuzz of static, followed by a child's voice saying softly and slowly, "Sirius, Vega, Altair." And just like that, my brain stopped processing the man in the suit because the voice had started, and Rule 3 didn't give me much time, and I didn't know how close we were to Betelgeuse. I ran, full sprint, leaving the cart behind, my shoes slapping the tile as I crossed the exhibit floor and burst into the staff hallway, nearly skidding past the corner as I aimed for the only safe spot I could think of, the supply closet just before the staff kitchen, the one with no vents and only one way in or out, the one that, as far as I knew, nothing had ever followed me into, yet. "Antares? Deneb," the voice echoed, and I slammed the door behind me, nearly toppling into a shelf of gloves and mop heads as I fumbled to twist the lock with shaking fingers, heart pounding so loud in my ears I couldn't hear anything else except that tiny, sweet voice counting the stars like a death sentence. "Polaris," it said, and I dropped to the ground, curling tight in the far corner beneath the lowest shelf, covering my ears, biting my tongue to keep myself from sobbing, because I could not let that voice reach the next name without being hidden, without being invisible, and the closet, thank God, seemed to understand because it stayed dark, stayed quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. The voice paused then, held a beat longer than before, and I felt my chest seize up, lungs aching from how shallow I was breathing. "Betelgeuse," the voice finally whispered, almost gleeful, almost like it knew. For a moment, no sound. Then, crack, somewhere far above, something shifted, something that wasn't supposed to, something that opened like stone against metal, and I swear the entire planetarium groaned with the strain of it, the walls shivering softly with a breath of air that was too cold, too deep, and didn't smell like anything from Earth. I don't know how long I stayed there, fists clenched, teeth locked, muscles screaming, but eventually the silence settled again, and the intercom clicked off with a pop and a soft whine, and whatever had cracked open far above me must have closed again, because I could feel the shift in pressure release like my ears had been underwater, and finally surfaced. When I emerged from the closet, the hallway lights were dimmer than before, not flickering exactly, but slower, like they were breathing with me or with something near me, and when I passed the spot where I had left the cleaning cart, it was gone, completely gone, not tipped over, not wheeled off, just vanished, and I could still feel the echo of those star names behind my ears, like someone had carved them into the inside of my skull. I made my way back toward the main observatory hallway, intent on just finishing the rest of the damn job and getting out, when I heard it, the footsteps above me. Not the clumsy shuffle of an animal, not the tap of loose ceiling panels. No, this was deliberate, pacing, measured. Something with purpose walking slowly above the tiles like it knew I was underneath, like it had done this before, and was waiting to see if I'd break Rule 6. I didn't look up. I didn't speak. I just moved vacuum in hand, wiping counters and pushing the machine down the hallway like my life depended on, ignoring the rhythmic steps following me from room to room, always just above, always just out of view, until they finally faded. Not quickly, not sharply, but like whoever was walking had simply grown bored and walked into nothing. It was around then that I reached Observatory Room 3, the one with the oldest telescope, the one mounted on the swivel base that creaked when you adjusted it. And the moment I opened the door, I felt a cold spike run down my spine, because the telescope, large, black, and rusted around the edges, was tilted upward, pointed directly at the ceiling. I hadn't touched it. No one else had access. And Rule 5 was clear. If it's pointed upward and you didn't move it, then leave the room. But something about it held me frozen in the doorway, eyes fixed to that long barrel of glass and steel like it was calling me, like it wanted me to look. And I don't know how long I stood there, sweating, lips trembling, my body swaying like it was already leaning toward the eyepiece. But something in the corner of my vision moved, a flash of gray near the window, and I bolted. I didn't wait, I didn't clean, I didn't even close the door behind me. I just ran again, heart roaring like a rocket launch in my chest, and when I finally stopped, panting, half collapsed in front of the planetarium dome, I saw her, a little girl, sitting cross-legged, tracing constellations with one finger into the dust on the floor, weeping, soft and sad and so wrong. I froze where I stood, not because she looked hurt, not because she looked lost, but because I knew, from the rules, from the tone of the building, from the way the air stilled, that this wasn't a child and I couldn't help her, and if I tried, I wouldn't make it out. So, I stepped back, one foot, then another, didn't speak, didn't move fast, just eased into the shadow of the hallway behind me. But as I watched, just for a second, she stopped crying. Her head turned and she smiled, not with her mouth. She didn't have one anymore. And I ran. I didn't look back as I sprinted down the hallway, because something deep inside me, something primal and urgent, like a voice wrapped in static and screaming from the gut of the earth, told me that if I so much as glanced over my shoulder, I'd see her levitating just above the floor, fingers still tracing invisible stars in the air, with that awful, featureless smile stretched across the blank space where her face should have been. And if she caught me looking, she'd follow me, not on her feet, but with the swift, jagged flicker of something crawling upside down through time and space, something that didn't belong in a building made by hands. I think I ran for minutes, or maybe just seconds. It was hard to tell because time thinned out around me like cheap fabric, stretching and breaking in strange places, and all I could hear was my own breath and the wet slap of my shoes against the floor. And somewhere above that, far too close, was a strange, rhythmic scraping sound, like nails dragging along concrete, not behind me, not beside me, but above me, pacing me as I moved, matching every terrified stride I made like something crawling in the rafters, something waiting for me to slow down. When I turned a sharp corner and stumbled into the janitor's closet near the west stairwell, I slammed the door shut behind me and pressed my entire body against it, my hands fumbling in the dark until they found the deadbolt. And even after I locked it, I stood there for a full minute, chest heaving, trying not to scream, trying not to listen too closely, because if I heard her weeping again, anywhere near this room, I don't think I would have had the strength to stop myself from clawing my way through the drywall to escape. There were no windows in that closet, just shelves of cleaning fluid and the faint smell of bleach and rust. But even in the pitch dark, I could feel something shift in the air, like the building itself had taken notice of my hiding spot. And I remembered Rule 3 all at once. Remembered it with the kind of gut-deep fear that twists your stomach into a knot before your brain even catches up. And I realized that the intercom hadn't gone off yet tonight, and that it always did, no matter what else was happening. That's when it clicked on. Just a low crackle at first, like old vinyl static or the sound of sand pouring across a microphone. And then a child's voice, calm, slow, deliberate, began to speak, listing star names in a cadence that made my skin crawl. Arcturus, Capella, Sirius, Vega, Rigel. My knees went weak as I dropped to the floor, hands trembling as I scrambled behind a stack of buckets and mop handles, pressing myself as small and tight as I could make my body, knowing what was coming, praying the voice wouldn't say the name that meant the dome would open, because even though I didn't know what that meant exactly, I knew that if it happened, I'd be erased from this planet faster than a shadow under floodlight. Altair. Spica. Polaris. The voice faltered then, just a tiny pause, like the child was considering something, or maybe listening to me breathe, and I held my mouth shut with my hand, biting down on my knuckles to keep from making a sound, because I knew it was close, I knew the name was coming. Betelgeuse. As soon as the word hit the air like poison, the light in the closet flickered to life and then burst, raining glass shards onto the concrete, and a low groan started deep within the building, the kind of sound you feel in your teeth and in your bones. And I realized the dome was opening. I realized I was too late. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was out the door, tearing through the hall like a rabid animal, ignoring the splinters in my hands and the blood on my arms from the broken bulb, because I had to get away from that sound. I had to put as many walls as possible between myself and that ancient yawning groan above me that didn't sound mechanical, but alive like the stomach of some sleeping god turning over in its slumber. The corridor warped as I ran, lights fizzled, walls seemed to bulge, and gravity pressed harder on my shoulders with every step. But I kept running until I hit a staircase and took it 2 steps at a time, unsure where I was going, unsure what floor I was on, but certain I had to get as far from the planetarium dome as I could before whatever was up there looked down and saw me. By the time I stopped, panting and half-blind with panic, I found myself standing just outside Observatory Room 3, and the second I saw the brass placard on the door, a cold sweat exploded across my back because I remembered Rule 5. And even though my entire body screamed at me to keep running, I knew somehow I needed to check the telescope, needed to make sure it hadn't shifted by itself. The door creaked open slowly, and inside, the room was quiet, too quiet, and colder than it should have been, like the heat didn't work here, or like something had sucked the warmth straight from the air, and I stepped in only far enough to see the telescope, already regretting it the moment I did. It was pointing straight up. I didn't move closer, didn't touch it, didn't even breathe too loud, because the moment I saw its angle, I knew that whatever was on the other side of that lens had already seen me, and maybe was still watching, waiting, curious. The hairs on my neck stood up as I felt a pressure, not on my skin, but inside my skull, like something trying to press thoughts into my brain that didn't belong there, strange whispers in a language that felt too old to be spoken aloud. And I backed out of the room slowly, never turning my back on the telescope, even though everything in me wanted to run. The moment I closed the door, I heard the footsteps above me again. Not fast, not slow, just steady, measured, deliberate. I didn't look up, I didn't speak, I just froze, heart hammering, and waited while the sound crossed from one end of the ceiling to the other, pausing just above me, like it knew I was there, before continuing on. I held my breath until it faded, until I could no longer tell if the sound had ended or if I had simply gone deaf with fear. Then I moved again, quietly this time, following the edge of the wall until I reached the elevator near the central atrium. But when I pressed the call button, nothing happened. Just a soft mechanical click and then silence. And that's when I heard the intercom again, clicking on by itself, crackling. But this time, no stars were listed. This time, a woman's voice came through, soft and trembling, saying just 2 words, "He's here." I didn't know who she was talking about, but somehow I already knew, because when I turned around, just past the edge of the next corridor, near the edge of the solar system exhibit, I saw him again. The man in the charcoal gray suit, no face, no motion, just standing, watching. And this time, he was closer. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, with my chest rising and falling like I'd just run a mile through a graveyard filled with open caskets, my eyes locked on the figure at the end of the corridor. Closer now, too close, his presence like a vacuum sucking all the warmth and air from the space around us. And even though I remembered Rule 2 and every fiber in my body screamed for me to bolt or to scream or to drop to my knees and beg for something, anything, I forced my legs to move, not away from him exactly, but sideways, carefully, so that I never turned my back to him, never met where his face should be, never acknowledged him with a single word, even though my throat was trembling with a name I didn't dare speak. I took slow, careful steps backward down the side hallway that led toward the maintenance stairwell, not the main elevator, keeping my eyes locked on the collar of his suit jacket instead of where his face should have been. And when I finally reached the red-painted door with the word stairs stenciled on it in chipped white lettering, I yanked it open just wide enough to slip inside, my hand still trembling on the knob, afraid to close it too fast, because I swear I felt something standing just inches from the other side. Something cold and deliberate and hungry, breathing in slow, soundless huffs as though savoring my scent. The door creaked shut, and for a moment, the stairwell was silent except for the high-pitched ring in my ears and the rapid hammering of my heart. But then, half a flight above me, came the sound I wasn't supposed to hear yet. Footsteps. Not the hurried kind or the clumsy stumble of another worker, but measured, heavy, deliberate steps echoing through the narrow stairwell like someone was walking upside down along the ceiling. My hand reflexively tightened on the railing, and my whole body froze again. The memory of Rule 6 pulsing like a scream behind my eyes. Do not look up. Do not speak. Continue cleaning. But I wasn't cleaning. I wasn't even near my cart. I wasn't even supposed to be in this part of the building. Still, I knew I couldn't disobey now, not after everything else, so I forced my gaze downward, even as the steps grew louder, closer, like something had stopped pretending to walk above me, and was now coming down the stairs, backwards, bone by bone, joint by joint, dragging a weight I couldn't see but could almost feel pressing against the walls like invisible wet hands. I took a deep breath, one shaky step, then another, never lifting my eyes, like gripping the metal railing like it was the only thing anchoring me to this world. And when I finally reached the second floor, I didn't look back, I just shoved the door open and stepped into the side hallway that led toward Observatory Room 3, and instantly I regretted it. The hallway was darker than before, as though something had sucked the power out of the emergency lights overhead, and a soft, mechanical whirring sound came from the end of the hall, low and constant, like the sound of something rotating, and when I peeked through the cracked doorway of Observatory Room 3, I saw the telescope again. Only this time it had moved. It was pointing straight up. I remembered Rule 5 too late. I didn't mean to look through it, not really. But there was something about the way it stood there, silent and towering, like an ancient, blinking eye that wanted to be seen. Like it had something to show me that I wasn't supposed to understand until it was too late. And before I realized what I was doing, I'd taken one step into the room, then another, and I was standing at the base of the machine, its massive body humming softly like it was alive. And I looked, not into the telescope directly, God no, but at the lens itself, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something moving on the other side. Not stars, not a planet, not the void of space, something else. It was looking back at me, and it smiled. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the mop bucket I'd abandoned earlier, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn cold and sour. There were wet footprints on the floor that hadn't been there before. Small, bare, child-sized prints leading from the edge of the observatory door all the way down the hall toward the central planetarium dome. And even before I saw her, I knew what I'd find. She was sitting cross-legged in the exact center of the dome, her back to me, shoulders gently shaking, head bowed, and one small finger tracing slow circles on the floor. Constellations, the ones painted on the tiles. Only the way she touched them made it feel like they were bleeding, like the lines themselves had turned to wet chalk, and she was smearing them into something new, something wrong. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't a little girl. It never was. I remembered Rule 7. Leave her alone, do not speak, do not touch her, do not offer help. And above all, if she stops crying, start running. So I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just watched her, waiting, praying that the quiet sobs would continue, that the soft whisper of her finger gliding over the floor would keep going. Because the moment it didn't, the moment the weeping stopped, it meant it was too late. But the weeping did stop. Just like that. A single heartbeat of silence. Then slowly, too slowly, she began to rise. I didn't wait to see her face. I ran. I don't remember which door I used to escape the dome or how I got back to the hallway near the staff lounge, but I remember the feeling in my legs, like they weren't mine, like something had reached into my body and hollowed out the bones, filled them with ash, and lit a match behind me to make me move faster. I remember the sound too, not her footsteps, but the absence of them, like the building had swallowed every noise except for the frantic beating of my own heart and the rasping breath in my lungs. When I slammed into the maintenance closet and locked the door behind me, I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body wouldn't allow it. I just stood there in the dark, shaking, surrounded by shelves of disinfectant and old mop heads, listening, waiting, knowing she was still outside, right outside, waiting for me to speak, to breathe, to move. The intercom crackled again, but this time, it wasn't a child's voice. It was the woman again, the one who had whispered, "He's here." Only now her voice was strained, like she was speaking through gritted teeth with something sharp pressing against her throat. She said, "Don't come back. You're almost out, but if you stop now, he'll wear your skin. Keep going. You know which wing is left." And my stomach dropped, because I did know. There was only one wing I hadn't cleaned, the one I'd been warned about since the first shift, the East Wing, and my next break wasn't scheduled for another 2 hours. I was going to have to go in, I was going to have to finish the job, even if it meant waking whatever had been waiting there this whole time, even if it meant I'd never come out, because if I didn't, someone else would have to, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Not again, not like last time, not after what happened to Caleb. So I took the long walk back down the central corridor, my mop handle slick in my hands despite the gloves, the wheels of the cart squeaking slightly as they rolled over cracked tiles that hadn't been replaced in decades. And every step I took closer to the East Wing felt like I was dragging a chain behind me, not just from the weight of the supplies, but from the heavy memory of Caleb's screams echoing in the back of my mind. That awful night when he disobeyed Rule 1 because he thought he could cheat it, thought he could clean the East Wing first and leave early to meet his girlfriend. And I remembered how we never found his body, just a bundle of his clothes folded neatly at the base of the locked double doors, like he had melted right out of them. The closer I got, the colder it became, and it wasn't the kind of cold that made you shiver. It was a wet, meaty cold, like stepping into a freezer that hadn't been cleaned out in months, one where the scent of something rotting clung to the walls and the shadows in that part of the building were wrong too. Not just longer, but denser, like they breathed, like they recoiled when the flickering overhead lights buzzed too loud. And as I reached the final junction before the East Wing, the motion sensor light above the doors blinked on and then off again. 3 times, slow and deliberate, as if warning me one last time that I could still walk away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I swiped my access badge, the one they gave only to night staff and only after you passed your 3rd shift without breaking down, and waited as the ancient magnetic lock disengaged with a sound like a whisper being choked out of a throat. And then the doors creaked open just wide enough for me to push the cart through, though they did not fully open, no matter how hard I shoved. Like the building itself was reluctant to let me in, and the instant I crossed the threshold, the lights behind me died completely, leaving me in a narrow corridor bathed only in a deep red emergency glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat, not mine, but something older, heavier, something rooted in the walls of the East Wing. The floor was sticky under my boots, and I didn't dare look down because the sound it made wasn't the normal wet squeak of a dirty tile. It was a squelching, sucking noise like I was stepping across a tongue. And the further I moved in, the more I began to hear it. A low, rhythmic clicking, like bones knocking together in the dark, steady and patient, always just ahead of me. Never getting louder, never getting closer, but matching my pace exactly, as though something, no, someone, was walking just ahead of me, dragging me along behind them like a dog on a leash. I kept cleaning anyway. I didn't know what else to do, because the second I stopped, I knew it would stop too, and I didn't want to know what would happen then. So I scrubbed the walls with a shaky hand, ignoring the strange flecks of rust-colored moss that curled up like dead skin when I touched them. And I wiped the foggy glass of the empty exhibit cases that held nothing but deep scratches on the inside, like something had been kept there and had wanted to get out. When I passed the old meteorite display, the one that had been decommissioned years ago due to radiation concerns, I saw movement from the corner of my eye, and I did the worst thing I could have done. I looked. It was Caleb. At least it looked like Caleb. He stood completely still in the dark corner near the bent metal podium, and he wasn't wearing his uniform anymore. No, now he wore the exact same gray suit I'd seen in the space exhibit, the one Rule 2 warned about, the faceless man. The thing that made you feel watched even when it didn't have eyes. But Caleb had eyes, or at least I think he did. But they were wrong, bulging and too wide. And when he grinned at me, the skin on his face rippled, sagged, and then folded itself back into a smooth blank slate, as though it had never been a person at all. And when I screamed, I saw his fingers twitch like they were mimicking the motion of cleaning, like he was still scrubbing the glass from that last shift, still trying to finish a job that had already taken his name. I turned and ran. I left the cart behind and sprinted through the corridor, but it didn't matter how far I ran, because every hallway curved just slightly to the right, and every doorway I passed looked exactly the same. Rusted metal handles, black window panes, and labels that had long since peeled off, and I knew I was in another loop. Not the same as Rule 4's hallway, but a different kind, one made just for the East Wing, and I remembered what the voice on the radio said to me 2 nights ago when it activated on its own. He waits in the silence, but he hunts in the rhythm. And that's when I realized the clicking sound had returned, louder now, surrounding me, echoing from the ceiling, the floor, the very bones of the walls. I ducked into a side room and slammed the door, pressing my back against it as something heavy dragged itself past in the hall, and the door pushed inward once, twice, as if testing my weight, before the pressure vanished and the clicking grew distant again, and only then did I turn to see where I had hidden. It was the East Observatory. The telescope was pointing straight up. I hadn't touched it, no one had. I remembered Rule 5 with a sudden jolt of nausea, and before I could turn away, my eyes had already locked onto the lens, and I don't know how long I stood there, but I saw something through it. Not stars, not space, but a spiraling hole in the sky, something alive, something breathing in the void. And it saw me too, because the shadows around the room twisted upward like smoke drawn into a vent, and a long, spindly finger emerged from the telescope itself, curling through the air with joints that cracked like glass under pressure. I fled again, and this time I didn't stop until I reached the fire door that led back to the central chamber. But it wouldn't open. The badge didn't work here. And behind me I could hear the footsteps again, heavier now, faster, and with them came the sound of distant weeping, a child's sobs echoing through the vents, and I knew what that meant, Rule 7. But I didn't see her until I turned back, and there she was, sitting in the middle of the hallway, her finger slowly tracing a constellation I didn't recognize, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark like twin moons, and when she looked at me, she stopped crying. I ran so hard I thought my lungs would collapse. And just as she began to rise, not stand, rise, like she was being pulled up by invisible strings, the intercom crackled to life again, and the voice began its slow, steady chant. Polaris. Sirius. Vega. I screamed and dove into the closest supply closet, yanking the door shut just as the voice said, Betelgeuse. And the lock clicked into place. But I knew it wouldn't hold for long, because the floor beneath me began to vibrate, and above me the ceiling began to creak open, revealing the curved interior of the dome, and something far above began to reach through. And as I pressed my back to the shelves and clutched my knees, I realized something else. The East Wing wasn't just a place, it was a trap, and I had walked straight into it, because someone had to, because someone always has to, and the rules, they were never meant to protect us. They were meant to contain it, and now I was part of the containment. Only 2 hours left. If I lived that long, if the dome stayed closed, if she didn't find me again, if he didn't wear my face next, I should never have come back, not after what happened to Caleb. Not after what I became that night. Because I think I remember now, I never left. Not really. I've always been in the East Wing. And I don't think I ever stopped cleaning, even when there was nothing left of me but my uniform, folded neatly by the door. I don't remember how long I stayed curled in that supply closet, rocking slowly against the rusted mop bucket, listening to the stars recited over and over again in a child's voice that didn't breathe between syllables, didn't blink between names, didn't belong to anything that had ever been born under our sky. And yet, just as suddenly as it had started, the intercom crackled with static one last time, went quiet, and the vibration under my feet stopped, though the scent of ozone and something older still lingered in the air like a warning unspoken, a taste of what had nearly come through the dome, had I been just a second too slow. When I finally dared to open the door, my hand trembling so hard I nearly dropped the latch, the hallway beyond looked exactly as it had before. But that meant nothing here. Not when the floor could shift under you without sound. Not when the shadows whispered things you almost understood. Not when your own memories began to fold in on themselves like paper wet with blood. And I could still hear the faint scraping of something dragging along the tiles in the distance, soft, like fingernails, or worse, teeth. I didn't know what time it was anymore, not exactly, because my watch had stopped the moment the voice said, Betelgeuse. The minute hand frozen just above the 12, the second hand ticking backward every time I blinked, and though I still had the master schedule stuffed in my pocket, it didn't really matter. There were only 2 sections left to clean, and I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that the next room wasn't just another exhibit or hallway or maintenance corridor. It was something older than this place, older than the planetarium, older than the rules themselves. The door to Observatory Room 3 had once been painted a soft pale blue, like a sky you could believe in. But now the paint had peeled away in long vertical strips like claw marks, left by something desperate to get out. And as I stepped forward, I could already hear the faint hum of the telescope beyond, the grinding of gears that no one had turned, the whisper of glass adjusting itself to stare into a part of the night sky that shouldn't be visible from Earth, not unless something on the other side was bending the space between us to meet me halfway. I hesitated, remembering Rule 5, the one rule I had never had to deal with until now. Do not look through it if you didn't move it. If it points directly upward, leave the room. There's something on the other side that can see you too. But what if it was already looking? What if it had been watching this whole time? What if the only reason I'd made it this far was because it wanted me here, because it needed someone to witness what waited in that lens? I opened the door. The observatory was freezing, the kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning or poor insulation, but something deeper, something cosmological, the kind of cold you'd feel if the stars went out, not just faded, but were snuffed like candles. And the dome overhead groaned as I entered, metal flexing in protest as if it too wanted to stay closed. And at the center of the room stood the telescope, massive and ancient, its surface covered in a thick coat of dust except for the eyepiece, which gleamed wet and polished like an open eye. I circled around it, careful not to touch anything, and that's when I saw it. The telescope was already pointed straight upward, unmoving, but humming faintly like it was alive, and something inside me, instinct, fear, memory, I don't know, told me to run, to leave the room immediately, but I couldn't move, not because I was frozen by fear, but because something was behind me now, standing silently at the entrance, and though I didn't look, I knew who or what it was. The man in the charcoal gray suit, no face, no breath, just presence. I kept my eyes on the telescope, refusing to turn, and said nothing, just like the rule demanded, but I could feel him, it, watching, as if it was waiting for me to break protocol, as if my silence was being weighed against something much worse. And every second I remained still, the humming in the telescope grew louder, sharper, until it wasn't sound anymore, but pressure, like a scream pressed just beneath my skin. Then, suddenly, I felt something brush against my ankle. A small hand. I nearly screamed, nearly turned, but didn't. She was here again. The child from the dome. She had followed me. And the moment she touched me, the dome above groaned again, louder this time, and I could see the panels beginning to shift, to part like petals, revealing a sky that wasn't ours. A sky filled with moving shapes, writhing in silence, too many limbs and not enough stars, and in the reflection of the glass, I could see the man in the gray suit moving forward, no longer content to wait. I had to act. Without thinking, I lunged toward the console and yanked the power cable free from the wall. sparks flying as the lights in the room died, the telescope stuttering once before going dark, and the groan of the dome ceased mid-opening, locking everything back in place with a deafening clunk. Silence. Real silence. And when I looked back, there was no man, no child, no telescope, nothing but a room filled with darkness and a sense of disappointment, like I had interrupted something terrible mid-birth, something that would try again later, when I was slower, more tired, less careful. I left the observatory without looking back, the door closing behind me with a hiss like a closing lung, and for a moment I thought, maybe I had broken whatever cycle was unfolding. Maybe I had shut it down for good. But then the hallway lights flickered, and I heard the looping steps again, the ones from Rule 6, the footsteps above that weren't on the roof and didn't belong to anything with lungs. And this time they were faster, heavier, like something running across the ceiling, matching my pace step for step as I fled. I kept my eyes down. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. And when the sound finally stopped, I found myself back at the central dome, the last area left to clean, and I realized I had come full circle. The beginning and the end all in the same cursed place, under the same cursed stars, with only one final task to complete. But the planetarium wasn't empty anymore. The chairs were full. Row after row of people, or things that had once been people, sat silently in the dark, heads tilted upward, watching a star show that wasn't on the schedule, a constellation projection that wasn't programmed into the system, and at the center on the stage where the laser pointer should have been, was Caleb, or what used to be Caleb. His skin was tight and gray, pulled too tightly over a shape that wasn't human anymore. And when he turned to look at me, I saw my own eyes staring back, my face staring back, stitched across his head like a mask worn backward, and he grinned with my teeth and said in a voice that wasn't mine, "We've been waiting for you. You're late." I didn't run. Not this time, because I knew now what the rules were really for. Not to protect us, not even to contain the horror, but to feed it, to keep the show running, to keep the lights on just long enough for one more person to step into the dark and take their place in the seats. And as Caleb stepped down from the stage and the others turned to face me, each one wearing a face I almost recognized, co-workers, janitors, guards, visitors, I finally understood the last rule, the one no one wrote down. Rule 8, don't finish your shift. Don't ever finish. Because if you do, you become the next exhibit. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring at Caleb's stretched wrong face, his voice still echoing in the vast chamber like some broken reel playing on loop. And all around me the lights flickered as the others, the not people, the echoes of shifts past, began to move down from the shadows of the dome's ceiling, their arms stiff at their sides, their skin like paper wrapped around wire, their faces a horrifying collage of familiarity and decay. And it was then that I realized the truth I'd been circling all night, that the planetarium wasn't just a place where the sky was studied. It was a place where something else studied us, watched us, kept us locked inside the rules, not to protect us, but to feed off the cycle we unknowingly completed every single night we clocked in. And I had almost let it happen, almost let myself fall into step with them, join the rhythm of the dead. But I wasn't gone yet, not entirely. And somewhere deep beneath the fear, beneath the weight of the stifling air and the burn of my aching lungs, I remembered the last thing the janitor with the stitched mouth had ever said to me, back on my first night when he handed me the list of rules and refused to speak. Finish, and you stay forever. Start wrong, and you wake it. He had written those words on the back of a faded photo of the planetarium, one that showed it empty, abandoned, overgrown. But in that image, in the glass dome above, there was a smear of red light not caused by any reflection, a smear that twisted and spiraled into a shape like an eye, and that same shape was starting to form above me now, where the dome ceiling began to shift again, this time creaking open like the lid of something ancient and alive. Caleb took another step forward, his bones popping audibly with each movement, and behind him I saw the child, the not child, crawl down the side of the dome wall like a spider on invisible thread, her eyes locked on mine, wide and blank, and as she dropped onto the floor with a wet thud, she began tracing a new constellation on the tiles, one that pulsed as she moved, glowing faintly with each line she drew. And when she looked up again, her mouth opened and a sound came out. Not weeping, not crying, but a melody. Something like a lullaby made of static and screams, and every part of me wanted to run, but I couldn't move because just then the intercom crackled again and the child's voice returned, whispering star names I hadn't heard before. Bellatrix, Deneb, Capella. I turned and ran, this time toward the west wing. Not because it was safer, but because I remembered something else the stitched-mouthed janitor had warned me about that night, something I hadn't believed then, but which now made horrible, perfect sense. There's only one way out once it starts. You have to break the cycle, even if it means breaking everything else. And so I ran through the western exhibit halls, past the shattered remains of display cases filled with glowing rocks that hummed as I passed, past the mural of the solar system that now had a new planet painted into it, a black sphere with red rings, orbiting nothing. And I didn't look back, even when I heard the footsteps begin again, even when I felt them matching mine, even when the voice on the intercom reached Rigel and paused like it was waiting for something. There was a hallway I hadn't used in months, sealed off after a leak, the one that passed beneath the central dome and connected to the admin offices, a place none of us were ever allowed to clean. And I burst through the door at the end of it, expecting dust and mold and darkness. But what I found instead was a room full of monitors, each one showing different rooms in the planetarium. And on every single screen, I saw myself. Not just present tense me, but dozens of versions of me in different uniforms, different eras, some scrubbing floors, some staring into space, some curled into corners with wide, hollow eyes. And I realized then why the uniforms were always there, folded neatly by the door when someone vanished. Because they never really left, because we were always still here, repeating the same night forever under the same stars that weren't stars. A voice behind me, low, gravelly, exhausted, whispered, "Don't look too long or you'll get stuck." I turned slowly and saw the stitched-mouthed janitor leaning against the wall, mouth no longer sewn shut but hanging open like a torn bag, his eyes sunken deep into his skull, and he pointed to the console in front of me where a button flickered red beneath a cracked plastic guard. "End it," he said, and though I wanted to ask how or what or why, I already knew. End the shift, end the dome, end the show. I reached for the button, but as I did, every monitor on the wall blinked to a new image, the dome ceiling fully open now, and above it, not the night sky, but a gaping void, and something was lowering through it. Not a creature, not a machine, but something that couldn't exist in words or thought. Something with limbs and mouths and constellations mapped across its body like scars. And it was reaching for me, and the child below it, the one in the dome, raised her arms in welcome, and all the others, the exhibits, dropped to their knees in unison. The voice on the intercom whispered one final word. Betelgeuse. I slammed the button. The entire planetarium shuddered violently. The lights blew out, the monitors exploded in a cascade of sparks, and the floor beneath me split open like paper. And for one infinite second, I felt myself fall. Not through space, not through time, but through memory, through every moment I'd ever ignored a sound, every time I followed the rules without asking why, every time I'd looked away from something wrong and told myself it was protocol. And when I landed again, gasping and broken, I was back in the supply closet where it had all begun. The checklist still taped to the wall, the mop still resting against the bucket, and everything quiet. Too quiet. There was no intercom now. No footsteps, no crying, just silence. I walked out slowly, expecting horrors, but the halls were clean, empty, ordinary. I passed the dome. It was sealed. I passed the east wing, dark, silent. I reached the main entrance and saw the early morning light seeping through the glass doors, and for a moment I thought, maybe it was over, maybe I'd ended it. But when I touched the handle, the same chill crept up my arm, and when I looked down at my uniform, it was no longer mine. It was older, dirtier, and folded neatly against the wall. And then I saw the clock on the wall shift, not tick, but shift, like it was correcting itself, and the time blinked back to 9:01 p.m., just 1 minute after the beginning of my shift. The same voice whispered through the vents. "Welcome, new cleaner. Please follow all safety rules." And when I turned around, the stitched-mouthed janitor was standing at the end of the hallway again, only this time, it wasn't him. It was me, holding the list, smiling, waiting to begin again.